There we go. I think we're ready, Phil.
Right, thank you, Viv. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Phil Huggins. I'm going to take us through the structure of the meeting this evening. As you can see, we are recording it, and the link will be made available to all our members, as will the PowerPoint in our month-end email, which will come out next week. So everybody will be able to see what we've talked about tonight and listen to the questions and so on that have come forward. So nice picture, as I say, to start with. Thought it'd be useful just to put up a quick summary of our committees. There's 8 of us at the moment. Some nice photos here because you only get some very small pictures on Zoom normally, but this is the 8 of us on the committee. Most of us have been here for since last April, so coming up what 10 months or so. I think Julie actually joined us slightly later than that. But obviously, without a committee and people actually putting their time and effort into something like a group we've got here, then we really wouldn't have got as far as we've got so far. So many thanks to the committee and all their efforts and input and innovation, etc., that's gone into what we've done. The structure of this evening, group strategy, we hope will be fairly quick, but we're very, very happy to take questions from anybody on the call this evening. We'd like to focus most of our time on the projects, and then we've got 3 sections at the end which will actually be fairly quick to run through, about 10 minutes in total. So we're looking at around about an hour and a half for this meeting, depending on how many questions there are. And as Viv, I think, has already said, if you can use the chat please for questions, and it would be helpful because some people also use chat for comments. If you've got a question, just put a Q at the beginning and then your question, and then we'll field those in the appropriate place as we go through this. And overall, this is a very important meeting and point for our group, because we've now got to the point where we believe we can put some stakes in the ground and start moving into some real action for wildlife around the projects that we think are the most viable to start at the moment. So I'm going to move into group strategy now. So as a new group, we felt it was pretty important just to get some words down to explain why we've created a group, what we're going to be focusing on, and how we are going to do what we think is the right thing for the environment and wildlife in our part of the county. We produced 3 interrelated documents. The Constitution is quite a formal document and was needed early in our life for the bank. And the other 2 are ones that we produced more recently and hopefully in a slightly more user-friendly format. We gave you links to the documents during the registration process, and we're going to make them available to all our members at month end. So I'm just going to go through some really brief highlights just to perhaps jog your memories and see if there's anything that you'd like to ask on the basis of the documents that we've produced. And then we'll see what questions have come through. And as I say, any questions, please prefix with a Q on chat. So the vision, values and purpose document is really trying to deal with, why and what in terms of our group. Now, clearly we are an affiliated members group for the Sussex Wildlife Trust, and we have a focus on part of the county, which is the Arun Valley and the surrounding landscape. But anybody who's a member of the trust can join our group. That's absolutely fine, but we will be focusing most of our conservation and improvement efforts on this particular part of the county. And obviously, being affiliated to a trust as we are, then the key strategic aspects and direction of the trust is something that's going to shape our group's activities very strongly. And some of you, perhaps most of you, have attended some of our previous meetings and seen some of the information coming around. So things like nature everywhere as a concept, nature recovery networks, which I'll pick up again a little bit on the projects, Sussex Flow, which is to do with water movement, drainage and so on, and protecting the landscape from flooding, and Lost Woods. These are the types of initiatives that we expect to be supporting with our activities and our projects. Now, obviously, we've got a landscape focus here, as we've said, within what we've called a region, as part of the county, but we need to actually build our capability and our contribution up incrementally. So when we get to our projects, you'll see that flavour coming through really. And very important thing to recognise a number of possible ways that we can provide this input into our surroundings. Prevention of further damage is one particular aspect, which is perhaps often overlooked in a way when you start looking at some of the headline activities. But prevention of further damage, restoration, creation, these are all valid ways that we can contribute as a group. And clearly a big part of this group and a major part of what we can achieve is only going to be realised with our members contributing. So we have a committee, but the committee is just a small part of our group. We have over 200 members now, and I really hope that by putting together an agenda that people are interested in and want to contribute to, we can start mobilising our joint effort across this group. And 3 words down the bottom there, I think, for me, try and capture what we're about. It's about engagement, members and non-members, because being a group actually, I think, is quite important to the trust as well, and quite attractive for people who want to do things locally for their own part of the county. We want to enthuse, we want to educate, and we want to take action. And today very much is that kind of call to action. Bit of an old-fashioned phrase, but I think it's really where we are now. The second document supporting that was something we call governance and guiding principles, and this is about how are we going to behave and operate, and what are we going to try and how are we going to try and achieve things, what are we going to try and do in particular ways. And there are overlaps here with the Constitution. We know that, but we had to have that Constitution early, and I'll explain a little bit more about Constitution in a moment. This document picks up committee processes, financial controls. It talks about projects and initiatives as a key kind of aspect of how we're going to kind of behave and operate. And also related to that, it's all very well carrying out improvement actions, but it's only when I think you understand what impact they've had do you really get that positive feedback as a group and as individuals. So we will be trying to build into a lot of what we do some degree of measurement and tracking and monitoring of what we're achieving. And of course, down the bottom there, effective communications, advertising absolutely is key. We need to reach out to all types of members, all ages, people who can contribute in different ways and want to contribute in different ways. But also anything we do with the SWT logo up there, we are helping, I hope, the trust expand and strengthen within the county. So it's not just about group members, it's also about people who see what we're doing. And therefore you will see communications and advertising being quite a key part of what we do, because I think it's really necessary going forward. And then the Constitution document, which was that third document, quite a dry, functional document. We needed it, as I said, early for banking purposes. We had to stick to a really quite rigid way of structuring that, and Sue Ewers on our committee did a great job in putting that together. And really, when you're dealing with banks, you say what you have to say. You don't try and say too much, because then that begs question after question. So we had quite a kind of run of activity getting our bank account set up, and therefore it is quite a restricted document deliberately. So those 3 documents are ones that will certainly provide us with that structure to move forward from, we hope. Now, we did have a little bit of feedback by email before the meeting. It was, I've got to say, largely complimentary, which was very nice. We had a particular detailed comment from one individual about some of the wording, which we'll take on board. And we also had a suggestion about potentially helping an area within our region to move forward based on some of the wording that we'd put in there around projects and so on, which we'll follow up. So there wasn't too much coming through. So hopefully that reflects that the documents were quite useful as a starting point. And there weren't too many, not too many questions, but thanks for the feedback that we did have before today. So I think we're just going to see if there's any other questions coming through the chat now. Viv's going to handle those for us. If we can't answer anything, or we run out of time for some reason this evening in this slot, then we'll come back to you via email. I'm always happy to have a chat with any member about what they think and what they'd like to see happening in the group. So if that's something that you'd like to do, just please drop an email through to us, and I or somebody will talk to you about that. depends who's the most appropriate. We're going to keep the question possibilities and comments open until the end of March, and then it's our intention then to adopt them in our AGM and then review them, 2 to 3 years if there's a major shift in strategy, but not change them too regularly once they're adopted is our intention. So Viv, have we got any questions now from the chat so far on this bit, please?
Phil, we haven't at the moment. I'm just going to look through the faces, shall we say, and see if there's any hands up or anybody sort of making some noises to try and ask a question. But no, nothing in the chat. So it looks to me like we can continue for now. Okay,
that's great. So if anything, as I say, if anything crops up, anything you'd like to ask about these or make any comments, then feel free. As I say, this is not closed today. This is open. Right. I think that's gone.
Sorry about that. It might be somebody trying to log in, but there we go. I think they will have to try another line.
Keep on. Right. Okay. All right then. So that's good, because I think that's also, well, it says two things. Hopefully the documents were pretty reasonable, and secondly, we can actually spend as much more time this evening on the projects, which is, and for me, and I guess a lot of other people, where this group starts to come alive. Right, so projects for 2022. Now I'm going to do kind of top and tailing for this really, and then the committee will, various members of the committee will pick up the projects or some of the projects, and I'll cover a couple of them as well. So we will be mixing up the presentation as we go through this section. I put in a picture here as a reminder for those who perhaps been at some of our meetings and seen this before, but maybe there's a couple of new members as well. It's Horsham district, but I want to ensure that you're not put off by this. I mean, the Horsham district forms about half of our region and half of it isn't. But this particular initiative is really representing what is a kind of key driver now for improving nature's lot throughout not only this county, but through the country. So nature recovery networks is all about joining pieces of land up, making existing areas of habitat larger, as I say, joining them together and gradually building up this concept of, nature can be and should be everywhere. And this picture on the right here is kind of very, I think, illustrative of the fact that there are corridors between green spaces. We have some major green spaces in our part of the county, like Knepp and RSPB Pulborough. These are really good reserves, reservoirs for nature, but what we're trying to do is maximise the opportunity for nature throughout part of the county. So when we look at projects, what we need to do is, we're not trying to boil the ocean at this stage because we're a relatively small group and a new group, of course. What we need to do is start putting the pieces in place and doing what we can and building upwards and outwards from those improvements and projects that we're running. We need to have projects that we can manage as a group. And it's also, I think, important for us as a group and for people, non-members perhaps around us, that we have some successes that we can talk about. So we need to pick things that really are ones that have a good chance of success and people will enjoy. And absolutely, where there's something happening that we can build on, whether it's a wildlife trust or another initiative, we should look at that very carefully to see whether we can just take that forward and use it as opposed to reinvent the wheel. But a kind of caveat to that is we really have to find a way of actually measuring and introducing this, dreaded term, but citizen science aspect to what we do. Because if we can't measure, we're just not getting that feedback, and we don't really know whether we're kind of making any tangible difference. So that's quite important. And then the last point here is also quite critical, because we need land owner permission to work on projects. And we have to be very careful about how we achieve that so that we get people on board and do not, alienate people at the beginning. So land ownership is also quite important. So, and why do we need projects? Well, I think there's so many benefits from having projects as part of our organisation. It gives us focus. It really helps us, I think, widen member contribution. It builds knowledge and skills within our group and within our region. It generates some confidence, tangible results, and, as I said, raise the profile for non-members. And I think it's very important that when we think about projects, we're not just talking about physical projects. There's lots and lots of ways that we can improve things for nature. And some of those projects, I think, will really emphasize the communication aspect as well, and how we enthuse our neighbours, friends, family, so on. So what we've done is, I think there's 7. We've identified 7 projects, and for each of those projects, we've got at least one committee coordinator, and we've reviewed them projects with the Sussex Wildlife Trust. They've given us their feedback, and a lot of them have, we've shaped them with their contributions from HQ. Now, what we'd like to do is kind of really have an approach where, whilst we've got a committee coordinator, we'd like to have a relatively, a manageable sized project team in each case to help us really drive the projects forward. So we are looking for members to kind of say, yeah, hey, that really interests me. I would like to be part of that core project team. Now, the second kind of concept here, and this is absolutely supported by the Trust, is that there will be certain projects where the concept of project champions really will help us, where they start getting more difficult, involved, level of knowledge perhaps starts to get complicated in some areas. But I think if we can find this project champion type role in some of our projects, a go-to person from a knowledge point of view, or people from a knowledge point of view, there might be several, then I think we can really help the overall project make progress. And the Trust have actually offered to, once we finalise our projects, to put in place help with training nominated project champions. So they've offered to kind of help do that training, but say 3 or 4 of our projects. And I think when we get there, we'll find that maybe those just need to be identified properly, and others won't perhaps need that concept quite so much. And then, of course, as well as people to help shape, organise, run, perhaps some, as I say, project champions in some cases, then there's the participation in those projects. So if you're interested to be part of certain projects, that's great. Some people might want to help organise them. That's also fine. So let's try and find the contributions and the roles that you'd like to take within each project and within our, let's call it our portfolio of things that we're going to try and do. So the best way of doing this at the moment, because we do have to respect the confidentiality, the best way of you doing this is to send an email to the normal address, and I'll remind you about what that is in a minute, and just say, I'd like to be involved in A, B and D, but this one I'd really like to help you organise. Just send an email, we'll sort that out, and we'll then have, we hope, those types of roles identified for each project, and then our coordinators can help take those to the next step. Now, all of your questions will not be answered tonight, but the intention is that the follow-up meetings will then actually get into the detail on each of the projects. So if you're not sure, then my advice would be put your name down, because you're probably going to be sure enough to want to participate, but you'll find out a lot more about these projects, I think, as we go forward in these stages. Now, the ones that you're going to hear about tonight are the ones we think are the easiest to start with, or the most appropriate if you've got a building blocks type concept. But there's plenty of other things that you might say, well, why isn't that there? Why isn't this there? We recognise that these on this screen here there's so many more things that we could grow into over time. And as we take forward our projects, some of them we hope would naturally take, for example, is more into wildlife corridors. Okay. Now the third one down there, we are considering how we pick up support for community and private green spaces. We haven't quite got far enough on that to put anything to you this evening, but that might figure sooner rather than later once we've kind of worked that through a bit more as a committee. Right, so these are the projects then that we're going to run through with you. So Viviane's going to take the first two, trees and invasive species. I think Sue's probably talking to verges. Christine's picking up churchyards for us, and that's moving along quite nicely. And then we've got a few here that we've kind of put under gardens, and then swifts at the bottom. I'm going to just talk to that tonight. So I don't think that is quite 7, but the gardens have grouped things together. So I think gardens is quite a difficult one to scope at this stage because you could do so much. But we'll hear about the ones that we think we could take forward at the moment. So I was like, questions at the end, and use chat, please. So I'm going to hand over now to Viviane to pick up the first two. Thanks, Viv.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with trees, just to kind of set the scene. I'd say, they are awesome, majestic, and hold an ancient cultural wisdom, giving us that sense of place and connection with our ancestors. So how on earth can we not be inspired by trees? So trees are not only powerful for their beauty, but also function as structures that capture carbon from the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis. They have vast root systems for communication, vast fungal systems above ground, and also support vast web of biodiversity. So in short, I'd say trees are essential to life. Now, many of you will know I'm lucky enough to live with someone who is a woodland ecologist, and I'm therefore in a unique position to have my own personal expert to hand. Many of you know Tony Whitbread, of course, and it's no surprise that he's been roped into this tree project. Also, support from the Sussex Wildlife Trust is a lady called Nikki Scott. She leads a partnership project together with the Woodland Trust called the Lost Woods of the Low Wealden Downs. This project aims to bring life back to the forgotten and fragmented ancient woods in Sussex. This will involve other partners, landowners, and other local communities to transform the landscape to boost biodiversity and revitalize traditional woodland management. This project stretches across a large area of the Weald from Pulborough in the west to Lewes in the east. Now, we're not intending helping out on all of that area, but we will focus on the Pulborough part, and I'll get onto that in a minute because I noticed that we have actually got Jeannie with us online as well, which is wonderful. So one of the detailed actions of the Lost Woods project is to map out ancient, veteran, and notable trees according to a national tree mapping scheme called the Ancient Tree Inventory. The rules and precise details are stipulated by the Woodland Trust, and there's lottery money involved. So this project is currently only in its pilot stage and will come on board fully in November of this year. So in practice, there are 4 things that our group intends to do with regard to trees in 2022. So we've latched on to Wild Pulborough Group, and it's Jeannie Whitman-Esdale who's coordinating this tree mapping exercise. She's called the project The Importance of Being Ancient, and I love that. It just gives a flavor of where we're going with this. The inventory in the Arun Valley area is currently devoid of any important old trees, except places like the Parham Estate. Now, Jeannie is a Pulborough Parish Councillor with a passion to preserve trees, and she's rolled out already a couple of training sessions this year, and some of you have actually joined that. And this is how to measure and document trees that fit in within this criteria. The key aim is to start valuing our trees by recording significant ones, and so that there is an awareness and protection possible through the planning system. So that's all about tree mapping. Another facet of this tree kind of focus is the tree warden scheme. This is again a national scheme run by the Tree Council, but rolled out in our area by the West Sussex County Council. The concept here is that each local area or parish council has available a tree champion who can advise on various aspects like disease, maintenance of, and sometimes removal of trees or limbs. This means that there is direct input into planning matters from trees that come into question. Some local tree wardens have actually become forgotten because the West Sussex County Council is underfunded. Our aim is to reinvigorate this existing tree warden scheme as it offers crucial supporting role to the parish councillors. And we have involved a few local villages in this area. It's Amberley, Storrington, Thacombe, Pulborough and Billingshurst. And some of the tree wardens are indeed on this call today. So I've been in touch with the coordinator, Julie Bolton, and it's a group of about 10 or 12 of us, including tree wardens, that are going to meet up and really just talk about trees and see what we can do to support this area. Another aspect we might get involved in is local campaigns. And there was one last year, for example, which is the Loxwood Stop the Clay Pit campaign. And some of you may have actually responded to that consultation. And finally, we do walks and talks. And we've got some wonderful nature reserves in this area with Ebeno Common and the Men's. And in fact, Tony did us a guided walk last year in Ebeno. And for example, he's also giving a talk soon on the 7th of March called Trees for Life. And this is with another conservation or sustainability group. So I'd say trees are an important focus, trees and woodlands, and we need to enjoy and love and value our trees again. They may have become a little bit neglected in this area with the tree wardens not getting the full support that they needed. And there's an exercise to do in mapping and getting these trees recognized. And I would almost go as far as saying this is our duty towards our ancestors and our future generations to keep these trees of significance logged and documented and loved. I'd like to end with a saying, which I'm sure you all know: blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. So if you'd like to know more about trees or anything to do with this project, please contact me. I've also got the help of Sue and Paul on our committee who are interested in this aspect, or contact Phil, like he said, on the Sussex Wildlife Trust Gmail account. Okay, so my next project I'm indulging in this year is Himalayan balsam. Himalayan balsam is also known as Indian balsam, and it's an invasive species, so the eradication of that is quite a different style of project to trees. And this is quite a lot more physically orientated. In 2022, we'll focus our efforts on the Upper Arun catchment, and we've identified some target areas that we'd like to tackle along the River Stour, which is Storrington, the River Chilt, West Chiltington, and the River Nut, which is in Nutbourne, Pulborough. It's Himalayan balsam is an introduced species into the UK, and in essence, something to bear in mind is that it's a garden escapee. So it was brought over by the Victorians from the Himalayas, and it is Impatiens glandulifera, and it's a relative of the busy lizzie. It is classed as an invasive, non-native species. It flourishes in moist conditions, and especially along riversides, riverbanks, and in the summer months, it grows rapidly and spreads quickly, thereby outcompeting other native plants and ground flora. It's an annual plant, and during the winter it dies off and it leaves the soil bare and exposed to erosion during the rainy season. So our strategy is to negotiate with landowners, and Phil mentioned the importance of this, so that we can come with a gang of people and on a particular date and physically pull up a whole area of the Himalayan balsam invasion. And this is literally the plant, root and all. This is usually done over the summer months when the plant is big enough to easily be identified, but before the seed pods appear. When they become ripe, the seed pods open explosively and scatter their seeds along the riverbed, and they drift along with the river, so very easy to spread. Each plant apparently can have about 800 seeds. So you can see the problem, leaving even a single flowering plant on a riverbank, which is difficult to reach. Seeds can remain viable for 2 years and are transported by rivers, as I said, and by humans. There is a happy Viv with a very tall Himalayan balsam plant. And in fact, it's hugely satisfying to unearth these plants and see a heap of them at the end of a working day. So I myself have been on a Himalayan balsam crusade for many years now, as we live along a chalk stream, and have seen this sort of invasiveness firsthand on our neighbours' land. So rounding up all the neighbours and friends and anybody willing to help out is a really important thing to do. These seed heads are beautiful pink flowers, and in fact, they do attract pollinator species. So some may see this as quite a positive thing, but the seed pods are so prolific, and at the right time, they will just spread into complete areas and take over. But apparently you can also harvest the seeds, and there are recipes available that you can have. The Sussex Wildlife Trust have got a great wetland expert, and that is in Fran Southgate. She recently returned to work after maternity leave. We are delighted to have her expertise at our disposal. And in fact, Fran has potentially agreed to a talk which potentially might happen in April. I will, of course, let you know more if this does take place. And she's very knowledgeable on her chalk streams. I'm also very pleased to say Paul Davy on the committee now works for the Environment Agency, and his help and advice on this project will be invaluable. Then I've had support from Phil and Sue, also on the committee, and they've said they're up for helping in the summer months to come and eradicate this particular plant. This sort of project is not achievable if we only work on our own in our own group. And it is with grateful thanks to the Storrington Conservation Society, Mick and Sue Denness, and also Wild Pulborough, who we will team up with in order to help eradicate this plant, hopefully within a couple of years, 3 to 5 years perhaps, and we should see quite a significant improvement. So if you're interested in joining me in this project, please give me a shout on my email, and I think that's it. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you, Viv. I think the next one is over to Sue. I think Viv is doing this one.
That's me. Hello, everybody. So our project is Rewilding Verges. So there are more than 300,000 miles of roads in the UK, with road verges running along most of their length. Roadside verges sometimes support remnants of old meadows and may be bounded by species-rich hedgerows or mature trees. Today, the majority of the UK's grass road verges are either cut too frequently or at the wrong time, or abandoned to scrub. Cuttings are left to lie, creating a dense thatch, inhibiting growth and increasing soil nutrient levels, which further stimulates vigorous grasses and other nutrient-loving plants at the expense of many species of wild flowers. The aim of this project is to help to reverse this trend here in West Sussex. We want to find ways to help restore and increase biodiversity on roadside verges across our patch. Well-managed road verges can be a wonderful refuge for wildlife, and they can also make a significant contribution to the nature recovery network by providing wildlife corridors, connecting species and habitats across the country. This is our vision for the road verges within our area. The West Sussex County Council Notable Road Verges scheme has been in place for quite a while. It focuses on those rural verges which make a special contribution to biodiversity, and they are, at least in theory, cared for under a different, more wildlife-friendly mowing regime. Urban areas, towns and villages also have extensive grass road verges. Often, these are kept tidy under a strict mowing regime, which ensures a lovely green sward, but does virtually nothing for wildlife. So what would we like to do? We would like to establish a team of members who can work together on this project. We do know that there are many groups locally who are already working towards a more wildlife-friendly future, and we can add to this vital work, cooperating with and learning from those groups. From our research so far, it is clear that we need to engage with those bodies who have responsibility for managing road verges. West Sussex County Council and our local district and parish councils have established programs of mowing, which we will need to understand in order to influence them. The West Sussex County Council Nature Verge Network Scheme has been established to support communities who want to create more wildlife-friendly road verges. Under this scheme, West Sussex County Council have established the Community Road Verges Pilot Project. Our initial focus will be on finding verges in our area which we can nominate to join the Community Road Verges scheme. Rather than having 5 cuts a year, community road verges are cut once in the autumn, and volunteers then rake off and dispose of the grass cuttings. The idea is that by removing the arisings, we would lower the fertility of the soil, enabling wildflowers that often already have seeds in the depths of the soil to outcompete the grass. Over time, it is hoped that the wildflowers will become more abundant. Fewer cuts will also give native species the chance to grow. Weeds aren't sprayed in and around community road verges. So while community road verges will be a start, we believe there are many ways in which we can help to improve verges across our area, and we will explore these together. So how are we going to move forward? In addition to the core project group, we will ask for volunteers to suggest suitable road verges, probably close to their homes, which could be nominated for inclusion in the Community Road Verges scheme. Such verges will need to meet some safety criteria and also be within a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit or lower. The deadline for this application is October 2022. It is possible that we might meet with resistance from local residents who may find uncut verges a bit too messy. We will need to engage with local residents and address these concerns. We will look at creating appropriate signage. West Sussex County Council provides some badges to put on lampposts. We'll probably need to produce flyers or leaflets to explain what we're up to. We might want to undertake initial surveys so that we can monitor any improvements in biodiversity, but the West Sussex County Council scheme doesn't require this. We imagine that a small team could take responsibility for each verge, but the work involved in adopting road verges is actually pretty minimal. For example, volunteers would need to do some simple verge maintenance, perhaps litter clearing, and of course it will be their job to collect and dispose of the grass cuttings when the verges are cut once a year. There may be some additional work conducting surveys to monitor any changes and hopefully improvements in biodiversity as we move forwards. But West Sussex County Council are keen to see initially what natural regeneration can take place in community road verges. So unless they want to, volunteers won't need to consider sowing additional seeds or doing additional planting. Once we've got our community road verges project up and running, we can look further afield. Perhaps we could look at our rural road verges, some of which, as I said earlier, are already designated by West Sussex County Council as notable road verges. We need to find out how well West Sussex County Council is managing these. We might be able to identify additional verges which could be brought into the notable road verges scheme. In this way, our project could further contribute to the nature recovery network, with wildlife-friendly road verges helping to enhance pollinator highways across West Sussex and beyond. Julie Gamlin and I, Surveyors, are coordinators for the Rewilding Verges project, and we hope that this has inspired you to join us. Thank you, Phil.
So beautiful possibilities on the side of the road. I think we're on to Christine next with Churchyards. Christine.
Hello, everybody. Right, okay. Now, Sussex Wildlife Trust has been working with the Diocese of Chichester, which covers East Sussex as well as West Sussex. And they have been working in the East Sussex area around the Lewes area for some years in terms of promoting churchyards and for the wildlife of benefits for, and also the community benefits. Now, in West Sussex, they wanted to have a pilot of around about 8 to 10 churchyards. And so far, we have got 3 churchyards or 3 churches that have agreed to become part of the pilot, and that's Billingshurst, St Mary's Billingshurst, St Mary's Storrington, and St Mary's Pulborough. Now, I've actually visited all 3 of the churchyards with church members and representatives from different community organisations, and they're all quite keen to be becoming involved. We've had to be very careful in terms of looking at the graveyards, and obviously remembering that the graveyards are there for a particular purpose, in terms of looking at the graves of the people are there, and also considering their relatives and their relatives' needs, in keeping the graves nice and clean and tidy, etc., etc. Where, of course, what we're trying to promote is that we have grass that's nice and long and should be ideal for butterflies and bees and insects and all that sort of thing. So we have been involved with those 3 churches so far. It's very much at its initial stages at the moment. Members are starting to sort of draw up wish lists, basically, in terms of the types of hedges and flowers and things like that they would like to possibly be including in their churchyards and that sort of thing. But the other side of it as well is we're hoping to be able to involve surveying, and Jerry Lindsay has helped. Jerry Lindsay and Christine Lindsay are not related. Let's get that one down the right way. And Jerry is going to hopefully be looking at the surveying side of it, and ideally what we would want to do is start different surveys probably from this spring onwards. That would be really good. And if anybody wants to get involved in terms of either surveying work, or of course in time it will be digging and planting and helping with maintaining with the people who are already involved, the different churchyards for the benefit of wildlife, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the next handover is to me, so I'm going to stay on. We should be on to gardens. I'm just going to do a quick overview of the gardens project, and then Julie is going to talk to the next 2 slides, and then I'll come back at the end. So I guess the problem with gardens is, how do you start? Because there's so many things that we could be doing. And I suppose quite an interesting statistic I picked up somewhere was that if you add together all the gardens in the UK, then it's broadly equivalent to the space of nature reserves. Now, nobody can disprove that, so I basically thought I'd include it on this slide. Now, most of us, I guess, on the call have got a garden of one size or another, and therefore we own a piece of land that we can act on, and therefore this land ownership issue is one that's just not an issue for doing work in gardens. As I say, many aspects available for us to improve them for wildlife, prevention, use of chemicals and so on, restoration, creation. And I think as a garden owner, I think maybe one of the things that you do encounter is there's many sources of advice, and how do you know which ones are the best things to follow? It can also get very complicated. So I think the whole thrust here for our group is we should make maximum use of some of the great experience of some of our members for the benefit of us all, and work out how best to improve our spaces. And whilst we're doing that, we also need to bear in mind this kind of core principle, which is how do we demonstrate that this is having any effect? So when Julie now takes us through the next couple of slides in a moment, then that is a key part of that. So what to include first? So what we've decided to include first in our proposed gardens project, or projects, however you want to term them, is work on pollinators, lawns and meadows, and then hedgehogs. So I'm going to pass over to Julie and then just come back on the hedgehogs front at the end. Okay, Julie, I'm going to pass over to you.
Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. The ideas that we're putting forward for this citizen science project is to achieve a long-term impact on all pollinators in our gardens, measured over a 3-year period. In the UK, there are more than 6,000 insect species that are regular flower visiting species. Pollinators are not just the more loved bees, butterflies and moths. They include some less popular flies, wasps, beetles and sawflies. The aim is to increase the quantity and diversity of all pollinators visiting our gardens. We would like participants to pledge that they will participate in the project for the whole 3-year period so that we can measure the success of the project over time. Neither Phil nor I are experts on pollinator species and their requirements, so I would appreciate members coming forward to act as champions with their expert knowledge so that we can give good advice and support to participants. There's a mind-boggling array of advice on how to improve your gardens for pollinators. We feel that a good place to start is to increase nectar and pollen resources through the year. And I say throughout the year deliberately. Due to our changing climate and weather patterns, our pollinators are increasingly active and searching for nectar in the winter months. I have already started to research a list of suggested plants for participants to use as a starting guide. I'm sure that everyone who joins the project team will have views on what they would like included. Any guidance that we do issue to participants will need to be aligned with the views of the Sussex Wildlife Trust. Ideally, participants will monitor the increase in numbers of defined key pollinator species in their gardens. Our initial research is suggesting that a small selection from each of the categories of bees, wasps, beetles, flies, butterflies and moths is appropriate. Participants will need the project team to provide some guidance and training on how to identify and record sightings of these indicator species. We would like to support the work of the Sussex Biodiversity Centre and use iRecords to record sightings. Hopefully the results will show successful increases and we can use the guidance and advice to help new members and the wider community to join us in helping pollinators on a larger scale. Obviously, the scale of any wider rollout would be dependent on how many group members join the project team and what time resources they're able to commit to the project. As part of the theme on pollinators, we would love to arrange talks and visits to member gardens so that we can share our experiences and knowledge. We had initially thought that we would leave enhancement of lawns and creating wildflower meadows until later, but the link to pollinators is very strong, so we are including some ideas here for them too. We are aware that there are members out there who have good knowledge and experience of creating and maintaining wildflower meadows. We would love for you to become project champions and help others with advice and support. We would like to publicise and support the Plant Life No Mow May initiative through our social media. That's something our project team can easily arrange. Everyone uses their gardens in different ways, and what people choose to do for wildlife has to suit them and their lifestyles. For some people, creating a short grass wildflower lawn may be a happier medium rather than creating a full long grass wildflower meadow. It would be good to give guidance on creating and maintaining both habitats. Again, we would like participants creating new wildflower lawns and meadows to do some recording so that we can quantify the benefits and encourage others to do the same. Sue, Ewers and I recently went to see the work that the Wild About Warnham group has been doing. They told us about a 1 metre squared wildflower meadow challenge that they had done. They had involved the local primary school and issued a small packet of seed to each of the children so that they could create their own mini meadow. We could run a similar kind of initiative if we have sufficient resources. We would also love for you to share your knowledge in this area by giving talks or opening your gardens for other members to see your wildflower lawns and meadows and to learn from you. I'll hand back to Phil now for the next slide.
Thank you, Julie. Clicking on. Right, so the other component of the initial gardens project is focused on hedgehogs, which in a way should be a quick win in terms of getting a project off the ground. But I have to say that if you look at statistics, hedgehogs have crashed over the last years. Now, coincidentally, what came out earlier this week was an update 2022 report on the state of hedgehogs. And it did show a glimmer of hope on this, in that hedgehogs in urban areas are actually seen to be recovering from what was a very low kind of position, but starting to show a bit of increase. Whilst in rural areas, it's actually quite grim still. But I think what we should be doing with our gardens is trying to build them as friendly as possible for these creatures. And it's quite a quick and easy thing to do, but one that actually starts generating, you know, the street aspect of nature improvement, because holes in, everybody knows that holes in fences are part of hedgehogs pretty much, hedgehog improvement, population improvement. But it's a great way then of starting to talk to your neighbours and building up this network across your street. And when you get examples like this, you can start inspiring other people to do the same types of things that you're doing and trying to do. So what Julie's explained, pollinators and then the meadows, lawns, it's not just about your own gardens as members, but it's about the example that you're then showing to people around you. So that's what we should bear in mind. And hedgehogs, I think, is a good example of something simple we can start doing, which brings in the kind of neighbour interest as well. Interestingly, there's only been 60 records of hedgehogs in our region in the last 8 years. A fact that I disbelieve it, that there have to be more hedgehogs than that. But on the other hand, how, you know, do we know how many there are? So in the same way that we're looking at measuring and monitoring and counting things, then we were doing the same. We should be doing the same with these animals. Now, this is a great example of where, frankly, we don't have to do very much, because Hedgehog Street is a very well established charity and organisational focus on hedgehog conservation. It's free to join. There's over 100,000 local champions already, and it really should be an easy thing for us to fold into our projects and our activities. And very importantly, the data that Hedgehog Street picks up is actually passed through into the Sussex Record Centre. So easy one to start, quite a few implications, and who doesn't love a hedgehog? Although unfortunately most of the time you might see them squashed on the road. Now this year I've not even seen one squashed on the road. So this is a situation that I really think we should start trying to rectify in our part of the county. Right, there's just one more now, and it's a kind of similar thing really to hedgehogs, because there's quite a lot of good reference material on swifts, swallows and house martins, and there's a lot of publicity around how their populations have really suffered over the years. So kind of similar thing really to hedgehogs. Only 90 records in the last 8 or 9 years in our region. Well, number one, I can't believe it. But first of all, we've got to find out what there is here. And secondly, we should be doing something absolutely to improve their lot in our part of the country. So the Swift Conservation Society gives great source of information, you know, where to site boxes, you know, where you can buy them from, how you kind of build that kind of colony concept and the calling devices. And this should be an easy thing to do. And we know that people are interested in swifts around our part of the county. I've seen swift boxes up in Storrington over the last few weeks. I've started to look for them, but we do need to take a bit of an inventory here. What have we got now? Where could we start expanding? And then I think we really have a project that we can get off the ground quickly in terms of box installation and so on, and see the results of this. So several years, this project, you don't just do it in 1 year, you start a process and you expand and expand. Now, swallows, house martins, I think they're going to be a bit more difficult personally. They are a bit more mucky and difficult to host on houses, I think. But once I think we've done the swift side of things as a group, I think we can extend into these related hirundines. So Paul and I are both going to work together on this, but it is something that, you know, I think we're both passionate about, and I hope to have 3 boxes up on my house before the summer. Just working on my wife at the moment. I'm sure she's fine on that. Right, so those are the projects that we think we should be kicking off. Just repeat some of the principles. We know there's a lot more we can do, but these for us are good starting points so we can start to get our teeth into things. please let us know then about your interest in these projects, whether you'd like to help organise them, become champions perhaps, or just, you know, I say just, but it's equally important, or participate. If you can let us know over the next few weeks, then we're going to start trying to organise the next steps, which would be project specific get-togethers where the detail would be drilled down to, and we'd start pulling together people's contributions. And for any of these email conversations, then there's the address down the bottom there, which you should be familiar with. We're going to look to see what questions have come through now. Jerry's going to help us manage these, and then if we do miss any, or you've got further ones, then we'll handle them through email.
Phil, it might actually be me.
Okay, you sure?
Well, it's been interesting. There's almost been one single question on every project, so maybe we should just take it working through from the first one, which was actually the Himalayan balsam question. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
So this is from Richard and Jenny Robinson in Amberley, and there's some controversy to what extent the Himalayan balsam suppresses native plants, and how good is do you think is the evidence? Now, I'm afraid I think Richard, you are far more experienced in plants of any sort than I am, so I don't think I'm going to actually even begin to attempt to answer that. But I wonder if there's somebody else on this call, and maybe Tony or anybody else who can sort of give some input onto that. Maybe Paul, actually.
Yeah, if you like, I'll say a couple of things. Yeah, I don't know where we are with science, but I certainly know from direct observation that actually where we've seen Himalayan balsam, the flora underneath is very much denuded, and when we've removed Himalayan balsam, the flora has come back. I've also noticed very much how the area below that's populated by Himalayan balsam is actually very bare in winter. So I think, as I say, I don't know where the science is at the moment, but I think it is pretty strong correlation, although that's not causation, that does cause a problem. I mean, the ideal would be for this plant to become part of our flora if it somehow gets into balance. And I think there is some work being done to introduce a fungus that may infect this plant and therefore bring it back into balance. So then it would just be part of our flora. But yeah, I mean, I haven't read the science recently, but I've certainly, from direct observation, I can certainly see that it seems to suppress native flora.
Yep, that's pretty good evidence, personal observation. Well, I think that in the the reason I raised it is because in the Botanical Society of the British Isles, there has been a certain amount of correspondence as to the effect of Himalayan balsam on native species, and the evidence didn't seem to be very clear cut, but perhaps it varies in different parts of the country. I don't know. I just thought I'd ask how good your knowledge was of the evidence base. That's all.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think it's a good question, because sometimes we do jump to conclusions, but yeah, some of the places where I've seen it, I mean, it seems to be far worse in Wales, where you see whole hillsides with nothing growing underneath the Himalayan balsam. So a bit of a worry.
Thanks for that. So the next one is really with Sue and the verges, and there's a comment in the chat from Russell Dewist saying that he leaves his verges outside the house to grow and just cut twice a year, which sounds great, but he hadn't realized that the cuttings should be removed. Do we want to just address that a little bit, Sue, or perhaps anybody else?
Well, as I say, the West Sussex County Council Community Verges scheme is a pilot, and their theory is that removing the cuttings will help with biodiversity, but only by adopting more verges and doing the work can we find out if it really does make a difference. So yes, I must say I've always removed the cuttings off my lawn, but that's because my mower has a thing to pick him up. There's not, I never really thought about before the impact that the grass cuttings would have if I left them lying on the ground.
In fact, removing the cuttings is actually important, because if you leave them there, what happens is nutrients tend to build up and the thatch builds up as well. And what actually happens when that happens is the more competitive plants do better. And the more competitive plants are the ones that are more vigorous, and they outcompete all the sensitive plants that you're trying to encourage. So you still get plants, but you end up with a smaller number of more competitive plants. So the point is, removing the cuttings reduces that nutrient input and gives a chance for a much wider range of species.
Well, that's helpful.
Tony, can I have a follow-up question on that, please? How does that, I'm curious to know how that links to kind of a more wild ecosystem. How would that happen? Would it be through grazing?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, when grazing happens naturally, animals tend to graze in one place and dung in another. So you end up with nutrients being removed from one place and put into another, and therefore creating diversity. So you end up with nutrient-rich places and nutrient-poor places.
Great, thank you.
Okay. There's a comment also in the chat box, which Christine, I'm hoping you might have seen. And this is again from the Robinsons and Emily. Just asking really, are you aware of the Churchyards survey carried out by the Sussex Botanical Recording Society, which has been done, so a comprehensive survey of the flora of almost all of the churchyards in East and West Sussex over the last 3 years. And I suspect you are aware of that, but I just thought you may want to expand to.
I've heard of it, but the only records I've seen are the Storrington churchyard. I haven't seen any records for any other churches.
I think Sue said that she'd sent records to you, Phil, is that right?
I've had the Storrington ones. I don't think I've seen the others yet.
Oh, right. The person leading this for the Sussex Botanical Recording Society is a lady called Helen Proctor in East Sussex. Perhaps I should give you her details, Christine, so that you can get in touch with her.
Yes, okay, that's fine. Yes, as I said, I've only seen in detail the Storrington ones, and that was done in 2016, 17, and 18. And I'm not aware that it's been done since.
There's a message just come in from Sue saying that she'll send the Billingshurst and Bulborough surveys later.
Oh, there we go. Okay, fine. Well, I'm only concerned with those 3 at the moment.
Oh, okay, fine.
Presumably, the other ones from all the other churchyards have been submitted to the Sussex Biodiversity Centre, I presume. I don't know.
Yes, I think they have.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. So thanks for all the help and input, because I think that's exactly where we want our members to really support us, because we just haven't got the experience necessarily. So I've got one here on hedgehogs. So I think that's going to be back to Phil. You may have seen this one in the chat, Phil, from Andrew Caswell. He doesn't want to sound negative because he's very supportive of our efforts, but isn't there a strong correlation between badger population and hedgehog decline or dissemination? And there's another comment on the back of that from Eric Jenkins saying, there's lots of badgers here, and the local hedgehog charity also wouldn't release hedgehogs because they'd get eaten by badgers. So maybe a comment or two on that?
I think it's a good point, isn't it? And I mean, I think I've seen pictures of badgers actually eating hedgehogs, but I think it's probably more of a indirect competition for food, perhaps. But so do we want to promote hedgehogs just to give food to badgers? Tony's got his hand up. Tony, do you want to say
it's a point that comes up quite often, and yeah, badgers do eat hedgehogs. That doesn't necessarily mean it affects the population, and correlation doesn't mean causation either. And I think even so, the correlation is actually quite weak. And after all, it would make sense because hedgehogs and badgers have been living together for millions of years. So actually, you wouldn't expect it to have a disastrous effect. A possible cause is that actually hedgehogs are being exposed to all sorts of pressures, and the badgers are another one on top of it. So whereas it's a natural pressure, it's actually having a damaging effect. But I think the correlation is actually fairly weak. I think even in urban areas, there are more badgers, and yet they seem to be recovering. The hedgehogs seem to be recovering. So it's a complex thing. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure where I stand on it.
Well, we've got Christine adding a comment.
The other animal that will eat hedgehogs are foxes. And I was only hearing yesterday a story from somebody who was telling me that her dog actually likes hedgehogs now, and apparently takes baby hedgehogs quite regularly whenever it finds them. So I think the poor old hedgehog's pretty doomed, to be honest with you.
Well, I suppose we could take the view that we're not going to bother them because they're just going to get eaten. Or we could take the view that, well, we'll try and improve the population so they can resist predation better.
I think that's the right answer, Phil, because actually all of these things do work together, and actually the answer is a complex habitat, and that's how these things manage to live together. I think it's right to have a hedgehog project, and I think it's a good approach. Sit away from that kind of sensitive population level, and then it can take the normal, quite natural hit that it gets from foxes and badgers.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about hedgehogs for me is that there's a family element to it, and it's quite a nice thing for children to at least try and get involved in. So yeah, I think we'll stick with it. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and then we'll see where it takes us, I think.
That's great. Well, I've been watching the chat, and I don't think there's anything else. I don't know, Jerry, if you've kind of spotted something that I might have missed, or just
No, I haven't seen anything else in the chat at all.
No. So I think for now, Phil, we've come to the end of the questions in the chat.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks for those. Obviously, please put your names forward and join our groups, because I think we need that, varied expertise. Right, we've just got a few more slides to go, so I'll just share my screen again. The next couple of slides are about surveying, so I'll let, I think Jerry's going to take us through this. Jerry, you there to go?
I'm here. I'll just talk a little bit about surveying and a shout out for surveyors as well. Underpinning our project work will be the recording and monitoring of the flora and fauna that we're observing. Records will provide the information by which we can judge the impact of any of the projects. And I think everyone who's talked about projects so far has talked about the fact that there will be a recording and surveying element in all of them. Initially, we'll need to establish some sort of baseline, which was Phil was said just talking about hedgehogs actually just now. And the surveys that have been done on the churchyards will give us a baseline as well. Initially, and then look at any changes as a result of the work that we do to try and improve environments. This will give us the opportunity to be able to monitor the impact of habitat management and other environmental changes. Can I move on to the next slide now, Phil? To support the individual projects, we'll need volunteers who are willing to assist with surveys and monitoring. And I think all of the projects are going to have some kind of monitoring process going on there. And Julie was saying about the need for specialists, particularly around the Pollinators project. I think garden birds, we can probably get people who can cover that quite quickly, but when you get down to the details of different types of hoverfly, I think you need someone who knows really what they're looking for. To assist with the development of our strategy for monitoring records and surveys, we'd like to form a records subgroup. And this is really just about, from my point of view, having a lead on the committee around recording and monitoring. I felt that because it was so integral to some of the activities that we're going to engage in, or proposing that we're going to engage in, that for one person to be keeping an eye across all of those projects in terms of I guess a quality control or an advice role really to people on about how they're going to go about surveying, how they're going to record, would be quite a big task. And I know that there must be within our membership people who have got a lot of experience of being involved in surveys and recording and monitoring of wildlife. And I would welcome a small number of individuals to help form a small subgroup, which will then report back to the committee in terms of monitoring the monitors, as it were, and that we'll be actually working together to actually look at how the projects are actually doing, what they're doing, and keeping them on track. And also developing a strategy really for the whole of the group around what our approach to monitoring will be. And I think the one thing that we have decided is that in terms of recording and data storage, that we are going to use iRecord as our, I guess the process by which we will actually enter all of our records and look at how we can then retrieve some of that data back to actually get an overview of the records that we've put in. So that's it. The subgroup, so on two levels really. There's volunteers for the individual projects to get involved in surveys and monitoring. And then if anyone is interested in actually joining a small subgroup to look at the way in which we develop a strategy and oversee the recording, monitoring and surveys, I'd really be really receptive to discussion with you and about how we can set up a subgroup. If you can contact us on the email that's going to be provided, and I think Phil's going to give some contact details in a minute. Okay, thank you. And if there's any questions on that, please put them in chat. Okay, Phil, back to you, I think, isn't it?
Thank you, Jerry. So we'll see if anything comes in on your section in a minute, any questions immediately, but such an important kind of area for us as we move forward. We all need to be contributing, I think, what we see, but it's making sure we've got the right processes, as Jerry said, in place, and the use of the tools and so on.
I mean, it just occurred to me, your discovery that there was it 80 records of hedgehogs?
Yeah.
I know I've seen at least 8 in our garden in the last 5 years, so I could have added 10% to the numbers.
Yeah. But did you put them into the?
No, I didn't.
No,
I didn't. No.
Okay. Had they been eaten by anything?
No.
Right.
They were happily eating other things.
Right, we're into the last couple of slides now, and by recording this, of course, we're making this presentation available to all our members, and so it's not just aimed at yourselves on the call tonight, but we always need help and support. Our 8 committee members is unfortunately going to go down to 7 shortly, because Sarah is having to kind of drop away because she's doing so much overseas travel at the moment. So we do have a bit of a gap coming up around our comms and advertising, which is quite an interesting position, frankly. There's an element of technology to it, but there's also a creative element. And it would be nice to get a secretary joining us. We're kind of splitting that duty around at the moment, and that's something that I think would be helpful, not just, and this is not just come and take the minutes, it's participate in helping us organise the group. So just to kind of stress that. So there's a couple of gaps on the committee, one developing, one that's been there a little while that would like to fill. The other thing, we are finding that we need to have first aid cover into a lot of our kind of events because of insurance reasons and good practice anyway. We've had a couple of members come forward to help us on this, which is great. Thank you very much. I think they're on the call tonight, but thank you for that. We've got some training offered from HQ, but anybody with first aid capability, please let us know, because you are very valuable to us in terms of when we organise things. And in terms of anybody who has any particular areas that they'd like to talk to the group on, please let us know, because it's fairly easy to put together an online session now, but also some speakers, it might be better to have them face to face as we start coming out of the pandemic now, as we're told. So anyway, so if you can help in those particular areas, would like to drop us a note, and we can have a chat. You don't have to make a commitment straight away. We can just discuss it and take it from there. And the last slide, I haven't repeated our email address on here, so sorry about that, but it is the one earlier in the slides. So any correspondence about tonight, anything you'd like to follow up questions wise, or anything you'd like to volunteer to, then to help on, then please use that address and we'll work through it that way. Upcoming events, we've got an online talk from George Reiki, one of our members, on Costa Rica, March 22nd. That's gone out, so if you're interested, please register. I've got to say, some of his photographs are mind-bogglingly fantastic, and there's one down the bottom corner there, just brilliant. We are planning through Paul Davy, our outdoor events coordinator, a couple of walks around Pulborough Brooks towards the end of March. In April, we haven't specifically defined a slot yet, but I think we're expecting by then we'll have some project type activities coming through, maybe some talks, not just for the project teams, but ones that people might be more widely interested in, for example. We do need an AGM. We're going to try and make it as interesting as possible to come to, with a speaker and a walk associated, because AGMs can be quite dry. But the AGM agenda literally is kind of half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll try and make it an interesting morning around that. And that's a Saturday, May the 7th. And Paul is starting to put the details together around an Amberley Wildbrooks Raptor Walk in the second half of May, with some local expertise that frequents there very often. So those are the upcoming events. Obviously, thanks for joining us. I think that there might be another question coming through. I don't know whether that was on surveys or anything. Is there anything more that anybody's asked before we kind of sign off today?
No, I don't think so, Phil. I can't see anything. I can't see any hands up at the moment either. So I think we're there from the audience point of view.
Okay, that's good. Okay, not too many questions on strategy, so we managed to finish a bit ahead of time. So many thanks again for joining this evening, and the relevant links to the PowerPoint and the Zoom recording will be in the next members monthly update. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Very interesting session. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining everyone and your comments and feedback.